The sound of a single gunshot echoed through the valley as the last rays of summer sun danced across the dusty landscape of Cottonwood Springs, Arizona Territory, 1879. Willow Bennett flinched at the noise, quickening her pace toward the small white church that stood like a lone sentinel at the edge of town. Tears blurred her vision as she clutched the crumpled letter to her chest, the paper worn thin from countless readings since the stagecoach had delivered it 3 days prior. Behind her, the town was alive with the usual Friday evening commotion, piano music spilling from the saloon, cowboys fresh off the trail looking for whiskey and cards, the occasional burst of laughter or argument carrying on the evening breeze. None of it mattered to Willow now. Nothing mattered anymore. The church door creaked as she pushed it open, grateful to find the sanctuary empty. Reverend Parsons would be at home with his family, preparing for Sunday's service, leaving this sacred space quiet and undisturbed. Perfect for a woman whose entire world had just collapsed. Willow moved down the aisle, her skirts rustling against the wooden pews. The simple altar stood before her, a cross hanging on the wall behind it, illuminated by the fading sunlight filtering through the small stained glass window. She sank to her knees, no longer able to hold back the sobs that had been threatening to overwhelm her all day. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why would you take them both?" The letter had been brief, businesslike even. Her father's mining venture in California had ended in disaster, a tunnel collapse that had claimed both his life and that of her fiancé, Thomas, who had traveled west with him to seek their fortune. In one cruel moment, Willow had lost her only remaining family and the man she had promised to marry. At 22, she was utterly alone in the world. Outside, Owen Blackwood dismounted from his horse, exhausted after a long day of tracking a stray herd for the Diamond B Ranch. At 31, he'd been riding for the outfit for nearly 6 years, establishing himself as one of the most reliable hands on the spread. His boss, Samuel Blackwell, often entrusted him with the most challenging tasks, like today's mission to locate 15 head of cattle that had wandered off during a thunderstorm 2 nights ago. Owen loosened his horse's cinch, patting the animal's sweaty neck. "Good work today, Diablo," he murmured, leading the bay gelding toward the water trough. His muscles ached from hours in the saddle, and a layer of trail dust covered his clothes and skin. What he wanted most was a hot bath at the boarding house, a decent meal, and his bed. As he watered his horse, Owen noticed the door of the church standing slightly ajar, a sliver of light visible inside. Unusual for this time of evening. Reverend Parsons typically locked up before heading home for supper. Curious and mildly concerned, Owen secured Diablo to the hitching post and approached the building. As he neared the entrance, a sound stopped him in his tracks, the unmistakable sound of weeping. Deep, heartbreaking sobs that seemed to rise from the very depths of someone's soul. Owen hesitated, one hand on the door frame. He wasn't a particularly religious man, attending services only occasionally when not out on the range. And he certainly wasn't one to intrude on another's private grief. But something about those sobs, so raw and desperate, tugged at him. He'd heard that kind of crying before, back during the war when men had received news of fallen comrades or destroyed homesteads. It was the sound of someone whose world had been shattered. Taking a deep breath, Owen removed his hat and pushed the door open wider. The last of the day's light cast long shadows through the small sanctuary, and there, kneeling at the altar, was a woman with her head bowed and shoulders shaking. Her honey-brown hair had come loose from its pins, cascading down her back in waves. He recognized her immediately as Willow Bennett, the schoolteacher who had arrived in Cottonwood Springs just over a year ago. He'd seen her around town. Of course, had even exchanged pleasant greetings when their paths crossed, but they'd never spoken at length. She was well liked in the community, known for her gentle way with the children and her quiet dignity. Seeing her now, completely undone by grief, made Owen's heart clench in his chest. He cleared his throat softly. "Miss Bennett," Willow gasped, startled by the intrusion. She hurriedly wiped at her tears, embarrassment flooding her face as she turned to see Owen Blackwood standing in the aisle, hat in hand. Of all people to find her in such a state, the taciturn cowboy who rarely spoke more than a few words to anyone in town. "Mr. Blackwood," she managed, her voice still thick with tears. I didn't realize anyone was here. Door was open," he explained simply, remaining where he stood. "I was passing by and thought I heard," he stopped, unsure how to continue without embarrassing her further. Willow drew in a shaky breath, attempting to compose herself. "I apologize for disturbing the peace. I'll be on my way." She struggled to rise, her legs numb from kneeling on the hard wooden floor. Before she could protest, Owen moved forward and extended his hand. "Let me help you, madam." Willow hesitated, then placed her trembling fingers in his calloused palm. His hand was warm and strong, steadying her as she got to her feet. The simple human contact, the first she'd experienced since receiving the terrible news, nearly undid her again. Fresh tears threatened. "Thank you," she whispered, quickly withdrawing her hand and smoothing her skirts. "I should go." "You're hurting," Owen said quietly, stating the obvious. His blue eyes, surprisingly gentle beneath the shadow of his sun-weathered brow, studied her face with concern. "Bad news." The letter crinkled in her hand, drawing his attention to it. Willow nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "My father and my fiancée, they're gone. A mining accident in California." Owen removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "Miss Bennett, I'm mighty sorry for your loss." The simple sincerity in his voice touched something deep inside her. "Thank you," she managed. I don't know what I'm going to do now." The admission slipped out before she could stop it. Owen shifted uncomfortably. Comforting a grieving woman wasn't something he had much experience with. But something about her vulnerability, standing there with tear-stained cheeks in the fading light of the church, stirred protective instincts he hadn't known he possessed. "You have family you can go to?" he asked. Willow shook her head. "No. My mother passed when I was 16. My father was all I had left. And your fiancé's people, back east. We hadn't yet met in person. It was an arrangement through correspondence." She didn't know why she was telling him this, a man she barely knew. Perhaps it was the shock, or simply the relief of speaking the words aloud to someone. Owen nodded, understanding the common practice of mail-order engagements in the territories. "You planning to stay in Cottonwood Springs, then?" "I don't know," Willow confessed, her voice barely audible. "The school term ends in 3 weeks. After that—" She trailed off, the uncertainty of her future suddenly overwhelming. Owen hesitated, then spoke with quiet conviction. "Miss Bennett, I can't pretend to understand the depth of what you're feeling right now, but I do know something about loss." He paused, memories from his own past briefly clouding his eyes. "And I know that even when it feels like the world's ended, somehow the sun still rises the next day." Willow looked up at him, surprised by the unexpected wisdom in his words. "I also know," he continued, "that folks in this town think highly of you. You won't be alone in this if you choose to stay." A fresh tear slipped down her cheek. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." He shifted his weight, seeming unsure what to do next. "Can I walk you home, Miss Bennett?" "It's getting dark." Willow nodded gratefully. The thought of returning to her empty rooms above the mercantile was daunting, but the idea of walking the darkening streets alone in her current state was worse. They stepped out of the church together, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue of the evening sky. Owen untied his horse, leading the animal alongside them as they walked in silence toward the center of town. The familiar sounds of Cottonwood Springs, so jarring to Willow earlier now, provided a strange comfort, a reminder that life continued even when personal tragedy struck. When they reached the side entrance that led to her rooms, Willow turned to the cowboy. "Thank you for your kindness tonight, Mr. Blackwood." Owen nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice low and sincere, "I know words don't help much at a time like this, but for whatever it's worth, I'm truly sorry for your loss." Something in his earnest expression, so different from the reserved demeanor he usually presented, touched Willow deeply. "Good night, Mr. Blackwood." "Good night, madam." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Bennett." "Yes." "Church might be empty again tomorrow evening if you need some peace and quiet." His offer was simple, but the understanding behind it was profound. Willow managed a small, grateful smile, the first to cross her lips since the letter's arrival. "Thank you." As she climbed the stairs to her rooms, Willow realized that for the first time in 3 days, she felt something besides despair. It wasn't hope, not yet, but perhaps the faintest suggestion that hope might someday be possible again. The following day dawned clear and bright, the Arizona sky a brilliant blue that seemed to mock Willow's grief. She moved through her Saturday routine, mechanically washing, dressing, and preparing a simple breakfast she couldn't bring herself to eat. The world seemed distant, as though she were observing it through thick glass. Around noon, a knock at her door startled her from her reverie. She opened it to find Mrs. Holbrook, the mercantile owner's wife, standing there with a covered basket. "Good afternoon, dear," the older woman said gently. "I heard about your loss from my husband. The telegraph operator told him when he picked up the store's mail yesterday." She held out the basket. "I've brought you some chicken and dumplings, fresh bread, and an apple pie." Willow accepted the basket, touched by the thoughtfulness. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Holbrook. Thank you. It's not much, child, but I remember how hard it was to think about cooking after my William passed." Her eyes softened with compassion. "Is there anything else you need?" Willow shook her head. "No, thank you. This is more than generous, Mrs. Holbrook patted her arm. "The ladies from the church will be by tomorrow after services with more food. You won't have to worry about cooking for a while." After the older woman left, Willow stood in the center of her small sitting room, the basket in her hands. The kindness of the townspeople was overwhelming, making her feel both grateful and strangely guilty. They barely knew her. She had only been in Cottonwood Springs for 14 months, yet they rallied around her in her grief. The day passed slowly. Willow tried to grade her students' arithmetic papers, but found she couldn't concentrate. As evening approached, she remembered Owen Blackwood's words from the night before. The thought of returning to the church, of finding that same peace and solitude, pulled at her. She put on her shawl and slipped downstairs, nodding politely to customers in the mercantile as she made her way to the street. The evening air was cooler than the previous day, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Willow walked briskly toward the church, hoping to arrive before full darkness fell. The small white building looked just as it had the night before, though this time the door was fully closed. Willow hesitated, suddenly unsure. What if someone else was inside? What if Reverend Parsons was preparing for tomorrow's service? Gathering her courage, she pushed the door open. The sanctuary was empty and quiet, bathed in the golden light of sunset streaming through the windows. Relief washed over her as she moved to the same pew she had occupied the previous evening. She had been sitting there for perhaps 20 minutes, lost in prayer and memories, when the door opened behind her. She turned, not entirely surprised to see Owen Blackwood standing in the entrance, hat in hand. "Evening, Miss Bennett," he said quietly. "I hope I'm not intruding." Willow shook her head. "Not at all, Mr. Blackwood. Please join me if you wish." He hesitated, then moved forward, sliding into the pew beside her but maintaining a respectful distance. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, the only sound the occasional creaking of the wooden building as it cooled in the evening air. "I want to thank you," Willow said finally, her voice soft in the stillness, "for yesterday, for your kindness." Owen nodded. "No need for thanks, madam. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't," she pointed out gently. "You did." He shifted slightly, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "How are you faring today?" Willow considered the question honestly. "I don't know," she admitted. "The grief comes in waves. Sometimes I can almost forget for a moment, and then it crashes over me again." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I keep thinking about what might have been if they had stayed here instead of chasing gold in California." Owen remained silent, letting her speak. "My father was restless by nature," she continued, "never content to stay in one place too long. When he heard about the mining opportunities out west, nothing I said could dissuade him." A sad smile touched her lips. "Thomas agreed to go with him to help establish us before our wedding. They were supposed to return in August." "Your fiancé," Owen said carefully. "You mentioned you hadn't met in person." Willow nodded. "We corresponded for 8 months before he proposed. He was a friend of my father's business associate in Boston. A good man, by all accounts." She paused. "It wasn't a love match, but I believed we would have been compatible. Content, at least." Owen studied her profile in the fading light. "You deserve more than just contentment, Miss Bennett." The simple statement, delivered with such quiet conviction, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "These days, Mr. Blackwood, I would settle for merely getting through each hour without feeling like my heart is being torn from my chest." Impulsively, Owen reached across the space between them and covered her clasped hands with one of his. "It gets better," he said softly. "Not quickly and not all at once. But it does get better." Willow looked down at his tanned hand covering her strong, calloused from years of ranch work, yet gentle in its touch. "You sound like you speak from experience." He withdrew his hand slowly. "Lost my parents and little sister to fever when I was 17. Then my brother in the war." "I'm sorry," Willow whispered, understanding now why he had recognized her grief so readily the previous night. Owen shrugged, a gesture that tried to dismiss the pain but couldn't quite manage it. "It was a long time ago. But I remember what it felt like, those first days and weeks, like nothing would ever be right again. And now I know that grief changes shape but never really leaves. You just learn to make room for it, to carry it alongside everything else." He met her eyes. "But you also learn that there's still room for other things too, even joy eventually." They fell silent again, each lost in their own thoughts as the last light faded from the windows and darkness enveloped the sanctuary. Finally, Owen stood. "It's getting late. May I walk you home again, Miss Bennett?" Willow nodded, gathering her shawl around her shoulders. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Blackwood." Outside, the night was clear, stars scattered across the vast expanse of sky like diamonds on black velvet. They walked slowly, neither speaking but finding comfort in the shared silence. When they reached her door, Willow turned to face him. "Will you be attending services tomorrow?" she asked. Owen hesitated. "I wasn't planning to. Sunday's usually when I catch up on chores at my cabin." "I see." She tried to hide her disappointment. "But I could make an exception," he added, watching her face. "If you'd like the company." Willow smiled, a small, fragile thing, but genuine. "I would actually, very much." "Then I'll be here at 10 to escort you," he said, tipping his hat. "Good night, Mr. Blackwood." "Good night, Miss Bennett." He paused, then added softly, "Try to rest." As Willow climbed the stairs to her rooms, she realized that for the second night in a row, the crushing weight of grief had lifted slightly in Owen Blackwood's presence. She didn't understand it, this connection to a man she barely knew, but she was grateful for it nonetheless. Sunday morning brought with it the familiar rituals of church day. Willow dressed carefully in her best navy blue dress, pinning her hair into a neat arrangement despite her trembling fingers. The thought of facing the entire town, of receiving their condolences and pitying looks, filled her with dread. Yet the alternative, staying alone in her room, seemed worse. At precisely 10 o'clock, a knock sounded at her door. When she opened it, she barely recognized Owen Blackwood. Gone was the dust-covered cowboy in working clothes. In his place stood a clean-shaven man in a dark suit, white shirt, and string tie, his usually unruly brown hair neatly combed. Only his sun-bronzed skin and the deep lines around his eyes betrayed his outdoor profession. "Miss Bennett," he greeted her, hat in hand, "you look lovely." Willow felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, you clean up quite nicely yourself." A hint of a smile crossed his face. "Don't get much occasion to wear the good suit. Feels strange, truth be told." "Well, it suits you," she said, then immediately felt embarrassed by the unintended pun. But Owen's smile only widened slightly. "Shall we?" He offered his arm. The walk to church seemed both too short and interminably long. Willow felt every eye on them as they approached the building where most of the town had already gathered. Owen must have sensed her anxiety, for he placed his free hand briefly over hers where it rested on his arm. "Just breathe," he murmured. "I'll be right beside you." True to his word, Owen stayed by her side as they entered the church, guiding her to a pew near the back. The whispers and sympathetic glances followed them, but somehow his steady presence made them bearable. When Reverend Parsons acknowledged her loss during the service, asking the congregation to pray for her strength and comfort, Owen's hand found hers again, squeezing gently. After the service, Willow found herself surrounded by well-wishers, each expressing condolences and offering help. Owen stepped back, giving her space but remaining watchful. When Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, began organizing the ladies to deliver food to Willow's rooms that afternoon, he caught her eye from across the churchyard and raised an eyebrow in question. Willow gave him a small nod, silently confirming she was managing. His answering nod conveyed understanding before he turned to speak with Samuel Blackwell, his employer. Later, after enduring what felt like hours of sympathy and well-intentioned but exhausting company, Willow finally closed her door on the last of her visitors. Her small table was laden with enough food to feed her for weeks: casseroles, pies, bread, and preserves, all delivered with genuine care and concern. She sank into a chair, emotionally drained. The day had been harder than she'd anticipated, each expression of sympathy reopening the wound of her loss. Yet she had survived it, largely thanks to Owen's steadfast presence. He had walked her home after church, promising to check on her again that evening if she wished. And she did wish it, she realized with surprise. In just 2 days, this quiet cowboy had become an unexpected anchor in the storm of her grief. True to his word, Owen appeared at her door just as dusk was falling. He had changed back into his everyday clothes: denims, a faded blue shirt, and his well-worn leather vest, but his hair was still neatly combed, and he'd kept his face clean-shaven. "Evening, Miss Bennett," he greeted her. "Thought you might need some air after being cooped up with visitors all day." Willow smiled gratefully. "You thought correctly, Mr. Blackwood. Let me get my shawl." They walked slowly through town, past the saloon and general store, continuing beyond the livery stable to the edge of town where the desert stretched out before them. The sunset painted the landscape in brilliant oranges and purples, the distant mountains dark silhouettes against the fiery sky. "It's beautiful," Willow breathed, momentarily forgetting her sorrow. "One of the reasons I stay in this territory," Owen admitted, watching the colors shift and change. "Never seen sunsets like these anywhere else." "Where else have you been?" she asked, curious about this man who had so unexpectedly entered her life. "All over, mostly. Texas, where I was born. Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico." He glanced at her. "Fought for the Union in the war, then drifted west afterward. Couldn't settle anywhere until I came here 6 years ago." "What made you stay in Cottonwood Springs?" Owen considered the question. "Honest work with the Diamond B, good people, and something about this land just felt right." He paused. "What about you? What brought you here from back east?" Willow wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders as a cool breeze stirred the desert air. "A teaching position, primarily, but also a desire to see something of the world before." She stopped, pain flashing across her face. "Before you married," Owen finished gently. She nodded. "My father thought I was foolish, but he indulged me, said a year of teaching in the territories would satisfy my wanderlust." A sad smile touched her lips. He was right in a way. "I fell in love with this place, the open spaces, the honest people, the children in my classroom. I wasn't ready to leave when he and Thomas decided to try their luck in the gold fields." They stood in silence for a while, watching as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear. "Will you go back east now?" Owen asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. Willow sighed. "I don't know. There's nothing for me there, really, but staying here." She shook her head. "Every place in town holds memories of my father, and once the school term ends, I'm not sure what I would do." "The town needs a teacher," Owen pointed out. "The children adore you. Mrs. Blackwell was just saying yesterday how her little Emma has improved in her reading since you came." "That's kind of her to say." Willow turned to look at him in the gathering darkness. "Mr. Blackwood, may I ask you something personal?" He nodded, his expression curious. "Why have you been so kind to me these past few days? We barely knew each other before." Owen was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "When I found you in that church," he said finally, "I recognized something in your grief, something I understood." He looked away out toward the darkened desert. "After my family died, I was alone, completely. No one to turn to, no one who cared whether I lived or died. I wouldn't wish that feeling on anyone." He turned back to her, his eyes serious in the starlight. "Maybe I just wanted to make sure you knew you weren't alone, that someone cared." Willow felt tears prick her eyes at his simple honesty. "Thank you," she whispered. "It has meant more than I can express." They began walking back toward town, the lights from windows and storefronts guiding their way. When they reached her door, Willow hesitated. "Tomorrow I must return to teaching," she said. "I've imposed on your kindness enough these past days." "It's no imposition, Miss Bennett," Owen assured her, "but I understand. You need to find your way forward." "Yes," she smiled softly, "but perhaps we might still meet occasionally. I've found your company to be a great comfort." Something flickered in Owen's eyes, surprise and perhaps pleasure. "I'd like that," he said simply. "Good night then, Mr. Blackwood." "Good night, Miss Bennett, and good luck tomorrow." As Willow closed her door, she realized that, for the first time since receiving the terrible news, she was looking forward to the next day, if only a little. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The following weeks passed in a blur of routine for Willow. Teaching provided a welcome distraction. the children's energy and innocence pulling her focus away from her grief for hours at a time. The evenings were harder, quiet hours alone with her thoughts and memories. But 3 times a week, Owen Blackwood would appear at her door, offering to accompany her on walks around town or to the church where they had first connected. Their conversations grew longer and more personal with each meeting. Willow learned about Owen's childhood in Texas, his experiences during the war, and his years of wandering before finding a home with the Diamond B Ranch. In turn, she shared stories of her youth in Boston, her dreams of adventure that had brought her west, and gradually, memories of her father that made her smile rather than weep. As May turned to June, the school term came to an end. On the last day, the children presented Willow with a handmade book of drawings and notes, thanking her for the year's instruction. Several parents approached her afterward, expressing hope that she would return in September. "Have you decided yet?" Martha Blackwell asked as they watched the children running and playing in the schoolyard one last time. "Samuel and I would be devastated to lose you as Emma's teacher." Willow smiled at the rancher's wife, who had become a friend in recent weeks. "I'm still considering my options," she admitted. "Part of me feels I should return to Boston, try to settle my father's affairs, but then there are reasons to stay," Martha finished for her, her knowing glance making Willow blush. "Owen Blackwood being one of them, perhaps? We're friends," Willow said quickly. "He's been very kind during a difficult time." Martha patted her hand. "Of course, dear, but you should know that in the 6 years Owen has worked for my husband, I've never seen him take such an interest in anyone. He's always been a solitary man." Willow didn't know how to respond to that, but Martha's words stayed with her throughout the evening. When Owen arrived to escort her on their usual walk, she found herself studying him with new eyes. At 31, he was handsome in a rugged way that spoke of outdoor living and honest work. His face had weathered from years under the southwestern sun, lines etched deeply around his eyes and mouth. But those eyes, a deep, thoughtful blue, held a gentleness that contradicted his otherwise tough exterior. And when he smiled, which was happening more frequently these days, his entire face transformed. "You're staring, Miss Bennett," Owen remarked as they walked along the creek that ran behind the town. "Do I have dirt on my face?" Willow blushed, embarrassed at being caught. "No, I was just thinking." "About the future," she admitted. "The school term is over. I need to decide whether to stay or go back east." Owen's stride faltered slightly, though he quickly recovered. "And have you made a decision?" "Not yet." She glanced at him. "What would you do if you were in my position?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "I can't rightly say. Depends on what you're looking for, I suppose." "What do you mean?" Owen stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "If you're looking for security, for a life with certain expectations and comforts, Boston probably offers that. But if you're looking for a place where you can build something of your own, where you matter to people because of who you are, not who your family was." He gestured around them. "Cottonwood Springs might have something to offer there." Willow studied his face, sensing there was more he wanted to say. "And what else might Cottonwood Springs offer that Boston cannot?" Owen held her gaze, something shifting in his expression. "People who would miss you terribly if you left," he said quietly, her heart beat faster. "People, at least one person," he amended, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. Before Willow could respond, the sound of rapidly approaching hoofbeats interrupted them. They turned to see a rider coming fast down the path, dust billowing behind him. As he drew closer, Willow recognized Jimmy Fletcher, one of the younger hands from the Diamond B. "Owen," the boy called, reining his horse to a stop beside them. "Mr. Blackwell sent me to find you." There's trouble at the north pasture. Rustlers hit the herd. They're gathering men to go after them. Owen's expression hardened immediately. How many head did they take? 20 or more. They killed Frank Porter when he tried to stop them. Jimmy's young face was grim. Mr. Blackwell says to come quick. They're riding out within the hour. Owen nodded sharply. Tell him I'm on my way. As Jimmy galloped off, he turned back to Willow, regret clear in his eyes. Miss Bennett, I'm sorry. Go, she interrupted, understanding the urgency. Be careful, please. He hesitated, then reached for her hand, squeezing it briefly. We'll continue this conversation when I return, he promised. Willow watched him stride away, her heart suddenly heavy with concern. Cattle rustling was dangerous business, often ending in bloodshed. The news that one ranch hand had already been killed sent a chill through her. The next 3 days were the longest of Willow's life. With school finished, she had little to occupy her time or distract her from worry about Owen and the other men who had ridden out after the rustlers. Each hour that passed without news increased her anxiety. On the evening of the 3rd day, she was sitting by her window watching the street below when she saw riders approaching town. Her heart leapt as she recognized Samuel Blackwell at the head of the group, followed by several ranch hands. She hurried downstairs and out into the street, searching the dusty, tired faces for Owen. Relief flooded through her when she spotted him near the back of the group, his face grimy and stubbled, a bandage visible on his left arm. He looked exhausted but very much alive. As the men dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, Owen caught sight of her standing across the street. Something in his expression softened, and he handed his reins to another cowboy before crossing to her. You're hurt, Willow said, eyes fixed on his bandaged arm. It's nothing. Just a graze. His voice was rough with fatigue. We caught up to them near the territorial border, got most of the cattle back. And the rustlers, a shadow crossed Owen's face. 2 dead, 3 in custody, sheriffs taking them to the county seat for trial. Willow hesitated, then asked the question foremost in her mind. Are you all right? Owen's gaze held hers for a long moment. I am now, he said simply. Before she could respond, Samuel Blackwell called Owen's name, summoning him back to the group. I have to go give my statement to the sheriff, he explained apologetically. But afterward, could I call on you? There's something important I need to say. Willow nodded, her heart beating quickly. I'll be waiting. It was well after dark when Owen finally appeared at her door. He had cleaned up, changing into fresh clothes, though fatigue still lined his face. Willow invited him inside, suddenly nervous about what he might have to say. Would you like some coffee? She offered, moving toward her small stove. No, thank you, Owen declined, remaining standing in the center of her sitting room, hat in hand. Willow, he stopped, seeming to realize it was the first time he had used her given name. Miss Bennett, he corrected. These past few days, riding after those rustlers, I had a lot of time to think. She waited, hardly daring to breathe. When bullets are flying around you, it has a way of clarifying what matters, he continued. And what I realized is that the thought of not seeing you again, of not having the chance to tell you what's in my heart, was more frightening than facing those rustlers. Willow's pulse quickened. And what is in your heart, Mr. Blackwood? Owen took a step toward her. I know it hasn't been long since you lost your fiancé. I know you're still grieving, and I have no right to speak of such things when your heart is heavy with loss. He paused, gathering his courage, but I find myself caring for you in a way I never expected. In a way I've never felt for anyone before. Tears pricked at Willow's eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. I'm not asking for anything right now, Owen hurried to add. Just the chance to continue seeing you, to be there for you as you heal. And perhaps someday, the opportunity to show you that there can be joy after grief, that your heart can open again." Willow moved toward him, closing the distance between them. "Owen," she said softly, using his given name for the first time. "My grief for my father is real and deep. But what I feel for Thomas is different. We never met in person. Our arrangement was one of practicality, not passion." She took a deep breath. "These past weeks with you have shown me what true connection feels like. When you were gone, riding after those rustlers, I realized that what I feel for you goes far beyond friendship." Hope dawned in Owen's eyes. "Willow." She reached for his hand, much as he had reached for hers that first night in the church. "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I want to discover it with you beside me." Owen's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "Are you saying you'll stay in Cottonwood Springs?" "I'm saying that wherever you are is where I want to be," she answered simply. The joy that spread across Owen's face was like sunrise breaking over the desert. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he raised his free hand to cup her cheek. When she leaned into his touch, he bent his head and gently, reverently, pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief, but filled with promise, a pledge of possibilities, of a future neither had dared imagine just weeks before. When they parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought to find someone like you," he murmured, "especially not in a church at sunset." Willow smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in months. "Sometimes blessings come in the most unexpected places," she replied, thinking of the grief that had led her to that sanctuary and the comfort she had found there, not just from prayer, but from the kind cowboy who had taken her hand when she needed it most. As summer settled over Cottonwood Springs, Willow and Owen's courtship blossomed under the watchful and largely approving eyes of the townspeople. Though some raised eyebrows at how quickly their relationship had developed after her bereavement, most recognized the genuine affection between them. Martha Blackwell proved to be their staunchest supporter, frequently inviting Willow to the ranch for Sunday dinners where Owen was always included. It was during one such visit in late July that Samuel Blackwell made an announcement that would change the course of their future. "Owen," the rancher said as they sat on the porch after dinner, enjoying the cooler evening air, "I've been meaning to discuss something with you." Owen set down his coffee cup, giving his employer his full attention. "Yes, sir. That piece of land along Cedar Creek that adjoins the northern boundary of the ranch, you expressed interest in it last year, as I recall." "I did," Owen confirmed, glancing briefly at Willow. "But Mr. Henderson wasn't interested in selling at the time." Samuel nodded. "Well, it seems his circumstances have changed. His son has written from California, asking him to come west. He approached me yesterday about buying the parcel, but I thought you might still be interested." Owen straightened in his chair. "It's for sale. 160 acres, including the cabin and barn. Henderson's asking a fair price." Samuel eyed him knowingly. Might be a good opportunity for a man thinking about his future. Willow felt her cheeks warm as both men glanced her way. Though she and Owen had spoken often of their growing feelings for each other, they had not yet discussed marriage directly. Later, as Owen walked her back to town in the gathering dusk, he was uncharacteristically quiet. "You're thinking about the land," Willow observed after several minutes of silence. Owen nodded. "I've had my eye on that parcel for 2 years. Good water, decent grazing, fertile soil in the valley, the cabin's small but solid." "It sounds wonderful," she said sincerely. "Are you going to make an offer?" He stopped walking, turning to face her in the fading light. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you could see yourself living there," he said quietly. "Because I don't want that land or any land unless you're sharing it with me." Willow's heart seemed to stop, then race forward. "Owen." He took both her hands in his. "I know it's soon. I know people will talk, but I love you, Willow Bennett. I think I started falling in love with you that very first night in the church when you were brave enough to let me see your pain." Tears of happiness sprang to her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. Owen dropped to one knee there on the dusty road, still holding her hands. "Then marry me. Be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. Let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy." "Yes," Willow answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Owen Blackwood." He rose and pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the joy and promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, Owen brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I'll speak to Reverend Parsons tomorrow," he said. "How soon can I make you Mrs. Blackwood?" Willow laughed, happiness bubbling up inside her. "How soon can you buy that land and make it ready for us?" 2 weeks for the purchase, maybe another week to fix up the cabin properly, he calculated. "Though we could marry sooner and stay in town until it's ready." She shook her head. "I want to start our life together in our own home." 3 weeks sounds perfect. And so it was that on a bright August morning, Willow Bennett stood before the altar in the same church where Owen had found her crying just 3 months earlier. The small building was filled to capacity with townspeople and ranch hands, all gathered to witness the union of the schoolteacher and the cowboy. Willow wore a simple dress of ivory silk that Martha Blackwell had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Owen waited for her at the altar in a new black suit, his face solemn but his eyes shining with love as she walked toward him on Samuel Blackwell's arm. When Reverend Parsons asked who gave this woman in marriage, Samuel answered clearly, "In the absence of her father, I do, with the blessing of this entire community." The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken with conviction and emotion. When Owen placed the simple gold band on Willow's finger, his hands were steady, his voice unwavering as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Parsons concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." As Owen kissed his bride, the congregation erupted in cheers and applause. Willow felt tears of joy on her cheeks as they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood for the first time. The celebration continued at the Blackwells' ranch, where tables had been set up under the cottonwood trees. There was music and dancing, feasting and laughter that lasted well into the evening. As dusk fell, Owen found Willow sitting apart from the festivities, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and crimson. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked, settling beside her. Willow leaned against his shoulder. "More than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "Though part of me wishes my father could have been here to see this day." Owen wrapped an arm around her. "I believe he knows," he said simply, "and I think he would approve of your happiness." She smiled up at him. "I think so too." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Owen stood and offered his hand to his wife. "Ready to go home? Home." The word filled Willow with warmth. Their home, the small cabin on Cedar Creek that Owen had worked tirelessly to prepare for her, with new curtains at the windows and wildflowers on the table. The beginning of their life together. She placed her hand in his, just as she had that first night when he helped her to her feet in the church. "Yes," she said. "Take me home, Owen." They slipped away from the celebration quietly, mounting the horses Owen had prepared earlier. Side by side, they rode through the gathering darkness, following the trail that led north to their land. When they crested the final ridge, the cabin came into view below, a single lantern glowing in the window that Owen had lit before they left for the wedding. "Welcome home, Willow," he said softly as they dismounted in front of the cabin. Before she could respond, he swept her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold into their new life. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable: a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, a bedroom visible through an open doorway where a handmade quilt covered the bed. "It's perfect," Willow breathed, taking in the home they would share. Owen set her gently on her feet but kept his arms around her. "It's just a beginning," he promised. "We'll build more as our family grows." Willow's heart swelled at the thought of children filling this home with laughter and love. "Our family," she repeated, leaning up to kiss him. That night, as moonlight streamed through the cabin windows, Willow and Owen discovered each other fully for the first time, a joining of bodies to match the joining of their hearts and lives. Afterward, lying in his arms, Willow marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I was thinking about that evening in the church," she replied. "How lost I felt, how alone. And then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even formed yet." Owen pulled her closer. "I think maybe we were both answers to prayers we didn't know we were making," he said thoughtfully. "I'd been wandering for so long, never finding a reason to put down roots anywhere. Until you." Willow laid her hand over his heart, feeling its steady beat beneath her palm. "Promise me something." "Anything? Promise me forever," she whispered. "Just like you did that first night when you took my hand." Owen captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I promise you forever, Willow Blackwood," he vowed. "Every sunrise, every sunset, every moment in between. Forever." As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, Willow knew with absolute certainty that the promise would be kept. The path ahead would not always be easy. Life in the territories rarely was, but they would walk it together, hand in hand, hearts entwined. 5 years later, Willow stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Owen taught their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his pony in the fenced yard. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, played at her feet, arranging pebbles in patterns only she understood. Inside, their newest addition, 3-month-old Robert, slept peacefully in his cradle. The homestead had grown along with their family. What had once been a small cabin was now a proper ranch house, with additional rooms built as they were needed. The barn housed not only their horses, but also the beginnings of their own cattle herd. Fields of wheat and corn stretched behind the house, and Willow's vegetable garden provided bountifully for their table. Owen had continued working for the Diamond Bee for the first 2 years of their marriage, saving every penny while simultaneously developing their own land. When James was born, he had made the decision to focus solely on their ranch, which they had named Promise Creek. The gamble had paid off through hard work and determination. They had created a prosperous homestead that supported their growing family. Willow still taught school, though now only 3 days a week, sharing the position with another woman from town. She loved watching her students grow and learn, just as she loved returning home to her own children and husband. As she watched Owen lift James from the pony and swing him high in the air, the boys' delighted laughter ringing across the yard, Willow's heart overflowed with gratitude. The grief that had once threatened to consume her had not disappeared entirely. She still thought of her father often, wishing he could have known his grandchildren, but it had transformed into something gentler, a bittersweet memory that no longer brought pain. Owen glanced up, catching her watching them. The smile that spread across his face, still capable of making her heart skip after 5 years of marriage, was filled with the same love and devotion he had shown her since that first night in the church. He set James down, whispering something in the boy's ear that sent him running toward the barn on some important mission. Then Owen crossed the yard to the porch, taking the steps 2 at a time. "What has you looking so thoughtful, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. Willow leaned into his embrace, savoring the familiar strength and warmth of him. "Just counting my blessings," she replied, smiling up at him. "And they are numerous indeed." Owen's eyes, still that same thoughtful blue that had first captured her attention, softened as he gazed at her. "Do you ever wonder how different our lives might have been if I hadn't stopped at that church that evening?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then, I remember what you once told me about Providence having a hand in these things." He nodded, glancing down at Elizabeth, who was now using his boot as a surface for her pebble arrangements. "I believe that more strongly now than ever. Some things are just meant to be. Like us," Willow said softly. "Like us," he agreed, bending to kiss her gently. James came running back from the barn, waving something in his hand. "Papa, I found the horseshoe you lost," Owen laughed, releasing Willow to swing their son up onto his shoulders. "Well done, Cowboy, that's a lucky find." "Lucky for Promise Creek," James declared solemnly, repeating what he had heard his father say many times. Willow smiled, watching the 2 most important men in her life. "Indeed it is," she agreed. "The luckiest place in all of Arizona Territory." And as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in the brilliant colors that had first captured her heart years ago, Willow Blackwood knew with absolute certainty that the promise made that night in the church had been kept, and would continue to be kept for all the days to come. Forever, just as Owen had vowed. Every sunrise, every sunset, every moment in between. Forever.